welcome to a brand new episode of Seize the Moment podcast. Today we have a very special guest. We have Steven Heine. He's a distinguished university scholar and professor of social and cultural psychology at the University of British Columbia. He's the author of Cultural Psychology, the top-selling textbook in the field, and his research has been covered in outlets like the New York Times, Washington Post, Guardian, Newsweek, and New Scientist. And his newest book, available now, is called Start Making Sense: How Existential Psychology Can Help Us Build Meaningful Lives in Absurd Times. Steve, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you so much for being here.
Great. Very nice to meet you guys. Thanks so much for having me on.
Absolutely. And so in his book, Steve wrote, given that the uncertainty index, like the Dow Jones, has risen and fallen while trending ever upward, it wouldn't be surprising if your blood pressure has tracked a similar pattern over the same period. This is because we can't just stand it when things don't make sense. We have a psychological system that seeks to maintain a sense of meaning such that we can feel everything is stable and orderly and can predict and control what will happen to us. When people experience uncertainty, they don't know what is going to happen and they are unable to prepare themselves for it. Uncertainty makes people feel things are spinning out of control, leaving them helpless and worried. The soaring levels of uncertainty that the world has been going through has left many people in a highly anxious state. Despite how uncertain things have been recently, we may be able to take some comfort in knowing that there have been previous eras of pronounced uncertainty and people somehow managed to get through these times. So I'm going to ask you the most basic question possible, because I feel like there's so many books and articles, the age of uncertainty. So there's been a lot of sort of drama around all of this. So, the first, again, going back to the sort of basics here, the first question is going to be, do you feel as though we are living, as they would say, in unprecedented times, that the era of anxiety, uncertainty, etc., is more pronounced than it's ever been?
Sure. Yes, I definitely do think this. I don't think it's hard to find evidence for this. Just go around and talk to the people in your neighborhood. Everyone's on edge these days. People are stressed. And if you look at sort of measures of people with anxiety disorders, number of days that people have missed work because of anxiety, it's been steadily tracking upwards, and especially among young people. So I think these are really anxious times, and people are really struggling.
Oh, wow. Okay. And then
Yeah.
so,
I remember being in college, presented with, okay, what major are you going to pick? What career would you like to pursue in the future? And you even mentioned this in your book, just given the multitude of choices that are in front of you. I felt personally paralyzed because I did have an inclination towards psychology, but initially I was getting pressure culturally from my parents. Become a doctor. You must become a doctor or a lawyer. Become a doctor or a lawyer. All of that. Um, and thinking back to how I felt during that time, I just felt like I was unable to make a choice. I felt like I couldn't. I almost felt like I couldn't move. I couldn't decide what I needed to actually do in that position. And it's a lot of people are experiencing that, especially in modern society. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I think this is very true, and I think it's something that we often don't really appreciate. I mean, people love choice. They say that you have a choice. You can choose to lead your life any way you want. That sounds really exhilarating, but but choice is a double-edged sword. And one thing I think we often fail to appreciate is just the responsibility that comes with choice. Because, if your life is up to you, then you're responsible for the life that you choose to lead. And then the anxiety that comes with that of how am I supposed to make the right choices here? This is something Soren Kierkegaard said, that anxiety is a dizziness of freedom.
Hmm.
Having all these choices, there's no set path for us to follow. It'd be much more straightforward in many ways if there was a set path that all you need to do is just do what society has dictates to you. But instead, we need to make our choices, and choices can be great. We can, make authentic choices, make it such that we're leading the life that's best aligned with us. But there's a lot of anxiety on the line when we do this.
Yeah, and a major part of growing up is creating your own blueprint. So we were just off air. We were talking about like the kind of overlap between Steve's work and then existential psychotherapy. So the sort of let me just see how I can kind of frame this. So there's a sense of this is according to Irv Yalom, the famous existential psychotherapist. So there's this sense that all of us have to experience, essentially called groundlessness, where once we realize that we're kind of off into the world, we've been sort of thrown in it against our will in some sense.
Hmm.
So we don't really have a blueprint for it. And so fundamentally, when we create meaning, I mean, more or less, even if we take on the meaning of others, we are essentially responsible for it. It is ours to do with, to kind of choose, to create, to recreate, etc. So, Steve, in your work, when you're finding that people are kind of coming of age, right? Kind of, so to speak, or for lack of a better term, what happens when they kind of have I guess that there's a discrepancy between the meaning that they sort of grown up with, whether it's sort of religious, some sort of spiritual system, and then when they kind of see that, maybe more so their way of moving in the world doesn't sort of fit with that anymore, and they're finding that for whatever reason these sets of beliefs, etc., just don't work for them. And let's say, would you call that an existential crisis, or how would they deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we are always trying to figure out our lives as we go along, and we often think we know what we're supposed to do. We have some sort of set plan, but along the way, we might realize that this set plan that we've had doesn't seem to be fitting right. It doesn't seem to align with us, and it leaves us feeling quite at a loss, right? What should I do if the path that I've been on doesn't seem to be heading in a direction that I'm comfortable with? So yeah, I think this is a kind of existential crisis that many of us have to deal with. That because we sort of feel the sense that we are to make our lives as we wish, that's a lot of responsibility, and because of that, we're not so comfortable if we have the sense that the lives that we've been leading here isn't quite right.
Why do humans seem uniquely troubled by meaninglessness when other animals don't appear to suffer from existential anxiety?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing that's special about humans is that we are a cultural species, and we are a cultural species in ways that other animals aren't. And what happens with humans when we get together, we immediately start sharing meanings with each other, and we start creating norms. We create a shared reality with each other. And other species have some reliance on culture, but it's nowhere near to the same degree that humans do. And so we create this shared reality with each other. We create these norms, and this happens remarkably rapidly.
Mm,
So studies find that, when students move to a new university dorm, these
Mhm.
dorms create their own cultures. Like within a
mm,
few months, you can see these cultures that form. So because we participate in these cultures provide us with ideas about the kinds of lives we're supposed to lead here. It provides us with ideas about what is appropriate, what is tolerated, what is forbidden. And so we have these ideas here which we use to reflect upon our own lives. And so ultimately, when we are leading our lives, we are comparing how we are doing to some shared ideas that we have about how we think we're supposed to be leading our lives.
mm.
And so then we confront these kind of inner challenges here about what kind of life do I think I'm supposed to lead? And this, I think, can be the beginning of a lot of anxiety for people that always sort of sizing themselves up to this idea that's not just theirs, it's something that they think is shared in the world around them, and that's what they're comparing their lives with.
Wow. Yeah.
Mm.
And then interesting. And going back to what I was saying earlier about there being sort of a conflict between the kind of structure or system that you grew up with, and then maybe sort of the way you're feeling or some of your judgments kind of in the present, right? So I'm thinking back now because there was a time where I was, I would say, pretty fundamentally a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah.
And then so for me it was kind of like so I would say it was sort of like it's like kind of not just shocking because that was just one version of it, but I would say it was so fundamentally, I would say, just now looking back on it, obviously because this is hindsight, but it was so necessary for me to kind of see the world as this like objectively kind of run thing. So what I would wonder is what
Wow.
happens with people is that when you have somebody who grows up in a particular system, right? So you're told, not to offend anybody, but you're told like there's a God, everything kind of makes sense. It fits into this particular scheme or schema, obviously, if you're a psychologist. And then so the way to understand the world is within this particular framework, right? So I feel like for me to kind of get out of that framework of being a conspiracy theorist, not to say I grew up with it, even though I kind of did, there was some version of it when I was kind of younger. But the point is to say that when I sort of got out of it, the world became much scarier. And so for me, when it didn't
Mhm.
seem like everything just fit into this nice box where it's like a group of people who are controlling everything
Sure,
and
sure.
everything makes sense within this framework, right? You don't really have to have objective purpose because technically your purpose is kind of combating this thing, right? Whether it's the New World
Mhm.
Order, the globalists, whatever, right? Like that's the purpose of all of our lives fundamentally. Just like if you're a Christian, the
Yeah.
purpose might be to serve God, etc., right? So, Steve, in your work, when you're researching now existential meaning, right? Meaning the sense that you have to create the blueprint for yourself, that there is a groundlessness, right? How do you find that A, people normally deal with this, right? How do they kind of navigate the fact that, oh shit, like there really is no objective sense of meaning, right? And then B, if they do navigate to, kind of, I guess, in that, or navigate through it, what do they do? How do they get through it?
Yeah. Well, first, I would just say that yes, while I do think we do need to create our own meanings in our lives, that's a challenge that we're all presented with. What research in existential psychology reveals is that there are some kinds of things that generally do provide the foundation for a more meaningful life,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
that people rely on even if they don't know that they're relying on. And so that ultimately, meaning is about connections. So, you can think of what does your podcast mean to you, and it's all of the ideas that you connect with it. It's the past guests that you've had. It's your moments that you're proud of. It's the struggles that you've had with it. All of those ideas that you connect with it influence what your podcast means to you. And I think there's a lot of similarity with how we make sense of the meaning of our own lives. It's what we connect our lives to, and that a richly connected life, I think, is a more meaningful life. And so the kinds of connections that we rely on to build the sense of meaning are one, our close relationships that they provide a key source of meaning for us, that our lives are shared with others, that the communities that we belong to is another way that we sort of have a sense of identity and a sense of common purpose that we
Hmm.
get from the communities that we belong to. Our work provides us with this, our connections with our work provides us with a sense of purpose or a sense of mastery, identity, close relationships again. And also, I think our connections with the transcendent realm are
Mm,
especially important for providing people with a sense of meaning, feeling that one's life isn't just the here and the now, but that somehow one is connected to things beyond the present
That's right.
here, that makes us feel that our lives do matter more, that our lives in the grand scheme of things make a difference. And I think it's kind of with this foundation that we have that we can feel that our lives are more meaningful. And I think when we are in situations where we are with our close others, where we are feeling good connections with our work, where we are having sort of feeling of transcendent connections, that those moments are when our lives tend to feel more meaningful.
mm,
Mhm. And actually, something I wanted to sort of connect to. So, Leon was just providing just before an example of how you used to be a conspiracy theorist, and we're understanding that at some point you were not,
mhm,
and so your meaning framework
mm.
was disrupted.
Right,
Your
right.
sense of reality was disrupted,
Mhm,
and you described that the time following that
mhm.
things felt like they made less sense to you
Yeah.
because you didn't feel that you had this organized sort of framework of there's somebody controlling things or that.
Mhm.
It felt a little more, you could say,
Chaotic.
chaotic.
Mhm.
Okay. Um, so that brings me to this question then. So Steve, if when some in your research, how do you find that people react or sort of reestablish I suppose their grounding after having their realities disrupted or their sense of reality disrupted.
Yeah, that's a great question. That's something I do study quite a bit in my research. And we propose that we have a sense-making system, that we are very dependent upon feeling that the world makes sense and that it's rich in meaning. And when we have that feeling, then we feel grounded, we feel very capable of going forward and acting effectively. But every now and then this gets undermined, that we realize that the meaning frameworks that we're relying on, the things that we take for granted, might not necessarily be so reliable for us, so that
Mm-hmm.
we can fall into, Albert Camus calls it the absurd,
Mm-hmm.
where we're no longer able to feel that we're able to make meaning going forward. And so what our research suggests is that when we have this experience, that we get a feeling. There's a feeling that comes with this. I think the best label for this feeling is the uncanny.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, this is
Mm-hmm.
a feeling that we get when we're in a situation that feels familiar, but there's something unfamiliar there about it, so that we're just unable to connect it the way that we used to, and that this signals to us that we're right now unable to make complete sense of what's going on here. It makes us feel a little bit alienated, makes us feel a little bit confused.
Mm.
And in this moment, it's really important for us to regain a sense of meaning, to regain the feeling that things make sense again.
Wow.
And there's a variety of sort of psychological defenses that we turn to in these situations. One, we might just rationalize
Mm-hmm.
our situation to try to convince ourselves that no, this is the way it's supposed to be. That the world is as I expect, and sort of just kind of just defend the our pre-existing meaning schema, and insisting that it's still okay. Um, we can try to rebuild a new sense of meaning, but this isn't an easy thing to do at all.
Mm-hmm.
That this is something that takes a lot of time and effort. I think a great example of just how difficult it can be to create a new sense of meaning, is can be seen in sort of scientific research, that scientists are relying on a meaning framework to understand the world. And what happens when there's new data that come up that are at odds with a scientist's theory? Science progresses, but often it's because of the new young scientists who
Mm.
pick up these ideas. And Max Planck, this
Mm-hmm.
famous physicist, said that science progresses one funeral at a time,
Mm-hmm.
because it can be so difficult to actually, to acknowledge that, wow, this whole theory I've been working on throughout my career is wrong, and here's the new theory I need to learn, this new meaning framework. That can just be really, really difficult. So what we find that people often do in the moment when things stop making sense is that they need to reground themselves,
Mm-hmm.
that they need to turn to other aspects of their life that continue to make sense, and that people seem to double down on those. So what we find is that in the moment when people are in the absurd, that they become sort of exaggerated versions of themselves, that
Mm. Interesting.
increase their commitment to their existing beliefs. So we find that liberals will become more liberal, conservatives will become more conservative, religious people will become more religious, and by doing that, you can sort of feel that you're getting to a place where things make sense again, and that those unpleasant feelings can kind of dissipate, and you can prepare yourself to confront them again in the future. It's not easy to make these big life changes and to keep oneself out of this chaos. But I think often we need to sort of take a break. I think our minds give us a break that right now you can't make sense of this. This is too much for you. So you want to just sort of reground yourself by, increasing your commitment to your other existing beliefs. And so that's something that we often study in the lab. We try to get people into a state of the absurd where things don't make sense. We try to have them experience something that they can't make sense of. We've had people be unwitting participants in magical tricks when things
Yeah.
happen to them that they don't realize, and like we've swapped experimenters on people while they're talking to someone. All of a sudden, it's a
Mm.
different person, and they're not consciously aware of the change, but they show this anxious response, and and we find that following that anxious response, they will double down on their other beliefs and become a more exaggerated version of themselves. So I think these are some of the psychological reactions that we have, sort of tools that we have to help us to get regain our footing in those times when things just stop making sense. And this, I think, happens quite often, that we encounter things that we're reminded about parts of ourselves that don't make that much sense, that our lives often aren't as sensical as we wish they would be. We're complicated people. We have usually have some contradictory beliefs and feelings. And when we're made aware of this, it creates this unpleasant arousal that we want to get rid of.
Mm. And we had Sheldon Solomon on the podcast, so you're referencing here terror management
Oh,
theory, right?
yes.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
he's referencing the book as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I know. I'm just, Alan, I get it. I'm
No, no,
just,
no. It was cool. I was saying when I was reading it, I was like, oh yeah, we had him on the podcast.
yeah,
That's
yeah, yeah, yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah. Because
Yeah, I'm
yeah.
doing that for the audience.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
because with terror management theory, I mean, so the idea there is that we kind of double down on beliefs that we have already had. And so what's so interesting is that fundamentally, I mean, here's my I guess the deeper question here. So do you find that there's a difference for people between secular theories of meaning or secular, let's say, creations of meaning, as opposed to sort of more spiritual, quote unquote, objective ones, right? Do you feel like some are kind of more fragile, more brittle than others, or do you find for the most part people more or less are able to lead their lives just as well with either?
Um, I'd say before I started doing research in this area, I would have said that any kind of meaning framework should be just as good.
Mhm.
But I no longer think that.
Oh.
And so we have a recent paper where we studied scientists, and what we were looking at is their attitudes towards science, and we have this sort of scale that sort of assesses three key sort of facets of people's attitudes towards science, at least that
Hmm.
scientists have. Um, One we call like scientific reductionism, thinking that we can explain everything in terms of atoms and molecules. That'll explain everything. We also have we call it scientism. It's the idea that the only kind of useful knowledge is scientific knowledge. That's the only way to discover things is through science. And
Mhm.
then a third facet called scientific optimism, that the world will become better through science.
Hmm.
Anyways, what we find is that the more scientists embrace these scientifically reductionist frameworks and this idea of scientism, where they privilege scientific knowledge above other kinds of knowledge, they actually score lower in meaning in life.
Hmm.
It's a pretty reliable relation that we find here. That so committing just to any kind of belief, I don't think is something that will necessarily provide you with enough meaning in life. And I think one reason is one key facet of a meaning in life is to feel that one matters, to feel that one's
Hmm.
existence is significant. And this is the facet that scientific reductionist beliefs are most at odds with. That just the idea that, I mean, in a way, it does seem like, thinking about it rationally, that I matter in the grand scheme of things. That seems like an awfully
Hmm.
egotistical thing to say in a way. But this is what research consistently finds, that the more people do have this feeling, the more meaning in life that they have. And some other research that we have finds that any kind of mystical belief seems to help to provide the sense that your life matters, that there's more than what just meets the eye here. There's more to existence than just the physical world that we're in. And when people have these mystical beliefs, on average, they tend to report more meaning in life. So that's what our research shows in that.
Oh, interesting. And what other measures were there besides that? Like in terms of mental
Uh,
health stuff?
Actually, in that study, we did so. I don't think in that study we had many other measures of mental health. Other studies that we have included measures of well-being and life satisfaction and meaning in life, and these do cluster together. There's
Hmm.
something similar, but they're not exactly the same though. That so, for example, feelings of on average, people who have more meaningful lives are happier. However, some of the key differences are that enduring our struggles, our difficult times, they tend to make us less happy, but they tend to make life more meaningful. That
Mm,
there's some post-traumatic growth that people
Mhm.
typically go through. Um, and that reflecting on our past and reflecting on our future tends not to be associated with more happiness, but it does tend to be associated with more meaning in life, like connecting these different aspects of our lives
mm.
is associated with more meaning. Um, so yeah, I do think that uh, meaning and other aspects of well-being share something in common, but they share some key differences too. Um, I think it's one of the more striking findings in the literature, I think, on meaning in life is if you look around the world, where are meaningful lives most found? They tend to be in poorer societies.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
That wealthier, yeah,
Because of
wealthier
Tolstoy.
societies, people
Tolstoy had
because
that
of
revel.
Tolstoy.
Yeah, he actually had that revelation. So he said, if you kind of look, because he was a part of both classes, so because there was no middle class back then. So yeah, he actually said that. He said, if you look at the poorer societies, these people are not only happier but find more purpose in their lives. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, but I think it's that's an I find that kind of a surprising finding too. I mean, it makes sense, just as you said, from Tolstoy's perspective, it does give you a sense of purpose. But in general, like an easier life tends to be associated with more happiness. Like happiness does correlate fairly weakly with income. Um, but yeah, when you look at the national level, though, where are people feeling their lives are more meaningful? It's where there's struggles. They have a purpose. They have reasons to live for. It's clear to them. And when your basic needs are taken care of, how you find meaning might not be so obvious and so direct that it might take a little bit of work to figure out, well, why am I doing what I'm doing? That finding a sense of purpose, so important to meaning, but it takes a little more work when life is easier.
Oh, wow. And was there an association between mystical? So I'm actually going to ask two questions. So what was the association between mystical meaning and resilience? And what was the association between secular meaning and resilience?
Okay, well, we didn't look at we our data doesn't answer that question. What our data showed is that um, uh, the more mystical beliefs that people had, the
Hmm.
more they reported that their life was meaningful.
Ah.
And in our other study among scientists, we found that the more they were committed to the idea that all you need to know is that the natural laws here, the world composed of atoms and molecules. The more they were committed to that belief, the lower was their meaning in life. So
Hmm.
it just points to that having the sense that there's more than the here and now seems to be tightly linked with feelings that life is meaningful and that my life matters in the grand scheme of things.
Mm. And this brings me back to something that I discussed earlier. I was talking about being paralyzed in my younger years with all of this choice ahead of me. And for a long time, I was very neurotic, very anxious. I had also had a breakup at the time, very disrupting to my sense of, the world. And it took me a long time to sort of reestablish, I guess, you could say grounding. And it was actually surprisingly, I mean, it was a lot of different existential philosophers that kind of helped along the way. But one particular thing of note, it just came to me as supposed to discuss, but it was actually Nietzsche. There's this essay that he had, and I believe it was the nobleman. I might be butchering the title, but anyway, it was the man of resentment versus the nobleman. And I remember specifically from this essay, the man of resentment was someone who lived their life as a no to everything. As like in other words, anything that occurred to that this particular characterization of men, they lived in reaction to everything that occurred. So their entire personality, their actions, everything was dictated by external forces. And then there was something called the nobleman who lived their life as if they're living like as sort of a proactive force, uh, making meaning, making decisions, actually um, not having your life essentially dictated by those external forces. It was that, and then I know so we were kind of in the realm of existential philosophers and existential psychology, but also uh, you probably know Alan Watts, of course. Alan Watts, the philosopher. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So that, like listening to him a lot, that it took a long time to sort of reorient myself. But by the time I did, I actually, I mean, I don't know if I can claim this, but if I had to compare the self that I had become and where I was before, it felt as if, you know, at least by the meaning of the word or words, I had a paradigm shift. And I know that you discussed that in your book as well. Could you maybe talk about like I'm finding a way to phrase this properly, but how someone can sort of undergo a paradigm shift, or rather, what is sort of involved in the process? Yeah.
Yeah. Um, that, that, that's a good question. Um, uh, I haven't explored this directly in my research, but I would say I think that we're generally going about I think a key thing that we're doing when we're leading our lives is we're narrating our life stories as we go
Right.
along here. I think we rely on these stories actually to fit all the different sort of conflicting parts together. And but people's life stories can go through some key changes sometimes, and so sometimes people will have a theme in their life story where they have a redemption sort of theme where they were on a decline and
Hmm.
and somehow they've overcome this
Right.
and are provided really with a new story now that my new story going forward is that I'm resilient in the face of these struggles that I've been through, that I've kind of conquered them. And so I think that's a key part of how we go through these paradigm changes. It's reflecting on the stories that we are narrating about ourselves, that we're trying to fit in all these different parts of our lives that might not always fit so well together. And one way that we can do this is by sort of retelling our life story, and we sort of connect things together in a way different than we had in the past. And I think that's important to note that, you know, we can't change what has happened to us. Like the same set of events has happened to us until now. But the way that we make sense of those, the way that we connect those is
Hmm.
something that we can retell, and that you know you can be sort of committed to a sense that, oh, my life is a failure for these reasons here, and sort of in doing so not integrating these other strengths that you've had in your life, these other positive experiences that you've had in your life, and to realize transformations that you may have gone through in your life, growth that you may have experienced. So I think a lot of this, the way that we change our lives is often through the way that we connect the different parts of our life through the stories that we tell.
Hmm.
And there are some stories are more constructive ways of narrating our lives than others. And I think we do have a certain amount of freedom in what how we reflect on these past events of our life, how we make sense of the journey that we've been on and the person that we become.
Oh,
Hmm.
super interesting.
And yeah, and in terms of the stories that we do tell ourselves, there are two concepts you introduce in the book of, or rather, a frame that a person can take, which is, or they tend to take rather, of I am good or I am not good. I was hoping we could one talk about those two concepts, but also how do they relate to self esteem. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think uh, that we do see the world through, you know, these lenses that we have through our meaning frameworks that influences what we see. That we, you know, we're all participating in the same objective reality, but how we experience it can be quite different. And, you know, I think the COVID pandemic is a great
Yeah.
example of this, that it's the same pandemic throughout the world, but some people see this as, you know, the worst health crisis of the past century, and others see this as, you know, big nothing burger. It's the same event being interpreted so differently. So
Mhm.
we we sort of rely on, I think, some key premises in our stories to keep our stories together. And one of them that's commonly shared is this idea that I am good.
Hmm.
And this is something that many people's life stories have this key premise, I am good, so that you interpret the things that are happening in your life in ways that are consistent with this, I am good. So that, if something doesn't work out for you, you have a way of explaining this problem away that, maybe you didn't do well, so a student didn't do well on an exam that they were taking. They might be able to still think that, well, I'm good because the I didn't have time to prepare for it, or it was an unfair test or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
That this, we have a way of explaining the events in their life so that they align with this idea that I am good. And this is common, I think, for many people's life stories. It does vary across cultures. So I do a lot of research comparing Japanese and North Americans kind of in this attitude about I am good. And I think for Americans, I think this is very much tied up with self-esteem. To think that I am good, it sort of means that I have a positive evaluation of myself. I when I think about myself, I think about my strengths. I tend not to focus so much on my weaknesses. I tend to think of myself as a good moral person.
Hmm.
And I think self-esteem is a culturally encouraged way in the US for people um, to have their life story told around this premise, I am good. In contrast, in Japan and in many other collectivistic societies, I think the way that people have this life premise, I am good, is with the idea that I have face, that I am maintaining face. I think this is the key route to uh, a positive self view in many collectivistic societies, where the idea is that I'm sort of living up to other people's expectations of me for the role that I have in their lives, and this involves a different set of psychological strategies to help one align one's life story with the idea that I am maintaining face versus that I have high self-esteem. And I think this is something that we do on a regular basis. That when we encounter events in our life, yeah, we are interpreting them in a way, we're defending our life story. We're defending these key premises of I am good, and we're doing it in whatever way is most amenable to helping fit in this new piece of information that we've encountered, so that we can still stick with our life story and stick with this premise that I am indeed good.
Yeah. What and then so on the surface, a lot of this stuff obviously seems wonderful, but now I want to go into like pretty heavy territory or heavier territory, let's say that. So now, when we think about meaning, story construction, group identity, right? What happens a lot of times is obviously it's kind of like goes without saying in some sense, like we have these in groups, out groups, right? So, I mean, when we have, let's say on the surface, it seems as though constructing meaning is a good thing, right? But what do we do as a culture when there is such heavy political polarization, and when you can't really have a story of meaning where it seems as though the other group, the out group, at the very least can be tolerated, let alone obviously seen as a part of the human species, but just like, let's say, just be tolerated, right? So how do we sort of navigate the fact that to have meaning, it often seems like there often has to be a contrast and a duality. Like it has to be, again, this notion of I am good, right? Somebody has to be bad.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I do think one sort of key source of meaning that we have is kind of a consensual reality, though, that our ways of understanding things, that we see that somehow they're reflected in some other people, at least. Some other people share our views, and that's one way that we can feel that our lives make sense. And I think we depend on this shared reality. And I think the increasing polarization in the world in general, and in the U.S. in particular here, I think is undermining this sense of shared reality, that the world that I'm experiencing and how I make sense of it, and realizing that, well, half the country is responding completely differently to these
Right.
exact same events, I think here is especially divisive. And I think this is a key reason why things feel so difficult and why people are so anxious right now, is that this is contributing to just the sense that I don't know what's right or wrong. I don't even know if my understanding of the world is correct, because I keep hearing from half of the population the complete opposite view that I myself hold, and that just undermines my confidence. So I think some sort of sense of consensus of that my views are shared by others helps us to feel that I'm making sense of things, that the world is as I understand it. And I think this increased polarization here really undermines this. And I do think until, we do become less polarized, and I do think it's somewhat cyclical that we go through these events. And I think some, I'm not sure what it's going to take to bring people back together again. But I do think that this is cyclical, that we will return. And I think that is that's going to help people feel much more at ease again, is when we can not rely so much on the idea that everything I say, that someone else is out there who thinks I'm completely wrong, and someone else hates hates who I am and what I stand for. And I think that's deeply corrosive to our sense of meaning going forward.
Curious, Steve, have you ever read the book Waiting for the Barbarians by J.M. Coetzee?
No, no, I haven't.
Oh, so let me
Sounds
just give
interesting.
you a little bit of the premise of it. So, because it's too much to get into, it's a really heavy book and very, very good. It was written at the time as a kind of response to the American Empire, right? So even though it's a fictitious story, so it's based on this empire that's pretty much thriving. Everybody's doing remarkably well or reasonably well,
Mhm.
well enough, right? So, but essentially, they kind of start a war with these barbarians, with these tribes that exist outside of the frontiers, right?
Mhm.
And so, what happens is like little by little, sort of it gets built up, right? And so, it's sort of the paranoia kind of seeps in, the boredom seeps in, and so if you look at the story on the whole, if like there's one, I mean, there's several themes, but I would say a major theme in it is, at least the way I remember it being discussed in my college literature class, was a lack of meaning. And so the way that we spoke about it, I remember, was here you have this society that's very aimless. So even though they're sort of building an empire, it doesn't seem like there's much friction to that. So meaning sort of these kind of tribes more or less acquiesce, and it kind of seems like it's not worthy of a goal, right? It's kind of just happening because it's sort of like, what else do we do, right? And then so there's this magistrate who essentially is the more or less reasonable one, and then you have a lot of hysterics in the town, especially some of the soldiers, and so they kind of concoct this war that doesn't necessarily have to be there. So the paranoia starts with, hey, there's these barbarians who live outside of us. It seems like they might be plotting against us, even though there isn't that much evidence. And then so little by little, this whole thing escalates where they essentially bring them in, they kill a couple of them, and then this gets back to some of the tribal leaders. The tribal leaders are like, hey, we can't really tolerate this because they're essentially going to extinguish all of us, and so we have to do something. And then little by little, this is kind of how it escalates, as many wars tend to, right? So here's what I want to ask on that, in that framework or in that context. So because I'm a bit more pessimistic about meaning in general, and so what I wonder is that from your perspective, obviously, Steve, do you find that it's actually possible to have shared meaning where it is more or less global or universal? Because what this book depicts, and I think it's a replica, or not a replica, it's an indicator of what we're seeing kind of over and over in the world, especially now in the US, is that when there is meaning, it is very tribal. It seems like, going back to religion, where it is good versus evil, where it is communism versus capitalism. It seems as though when people think about meaning, maybe I'm just completely off, but it seems very seldom do we see meaning as in terms of like a global kind of perspective, in terms of the global kind of race or humans or whatever, or just animals, everybody included, right? I very rarely see meaning in the sense of, here's how we can thrive, but I more so see it in the sense of, here's like why we're the good ones, right? Here's how,
Uh-huh.
kind of like why we need to win fundamentally. So I mean, you see this in sports, wherever else, and obviously kind of
Mhm. Yep.
less significant ways, right? But my point is to say that, I guess my real question is, so in your framework of the global meaning, right, where do you see that, or how do you see that as a possibility? Because again, all over the world, again, Waiting for the Barbarians was just a good example of this, is what you see is that when people do get more or less bored, they become very tribal.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I do think, you know, uh, we are tribal as a species too, that we did grow up. I mean, we evolved in situations where we were dependent on others and often facing other tribes that we had to contend with, that we had to that we had to often fight with. And I think that, yeah, so our tribal identities, I think, are key to us. I think the problem, though, that we're facing now is that within the tribe, there's the seams are splitting apart. That
Mm,
at least within like the national tribe, and now, yeah, that people may feel more connected to those in other countries than they do to their neighbor across the street, or to, their uncle at Thanksgiving dinner. That these divisions have really, yeah, undercut the tribes that we before, if we thought that we belonged to, and now these political divisions exist within these, within our tribes. So I do think, our tribal identity is key, but it's usually, yeah, an out group. And I think historically this has often been other nations. That was the core of, the key tribes that we belong to, and now it's switching to, I think, a political dimension. And I think this is more challenging, how we can feel that we belong to the same tribe if we view the world so differently.
right. And it also seems like there's such a backlash against it, like that sense of a global tribe. Like, if you think about like John Lennon, for example, in the song Imagine, I mean, most people say, well, oh, that's just communism. We don't
Hmm.
want that. So, but what I'm saying is it's not even just Lennon, as just that's one example. You often have, whenever there's a shared perspective or an attempt at a shared perspective, I mean, you name it all across the board, right? When we're talking about racial issues, civil rights, etc. Anytime there's any sense of or attempt at unity, it seems like there's always so much backlash.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, yeah. Um, and it hasn't always been, the backlash hasn't always been as bad as it is right now. And I think that's just showing just how, yeah, just how bad the current level of polarization is. And I think, yeah, some common challenge is one way of helping us feel that we're part of the same team again. Right now, it's within our team that the divisions lie. And so I think, yeah, I think if aliens came to the Earth, that would be actually helpful for us uniting again
Sure.
right.
as a tribe.
Yeah.
So maybe that's something we can look forward to.
I love it.
Absolutely. And by the way, probably the closest thing approximating what you're talking about is sort of a global sense making.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So the closest thing approximating that probably is just the biggest probably religions in the world,
Mm,
right? So like, I mean, we're not, it's not there because obviously it's still a large groups of people who do not share the same religion, but
hmm.
like, okay, there's over 1 billion people who practice Islam, for
Sure.
example. So, not saying that everyone in that,
Yeah, because there's
you
so
know,
many sects. Right,
yeah,
right,
of
right,
course,
right.
but still, that's probably the closest thing, maybe. Or if you're talking about just at least if, you frame it as, okay, countries that people belong to. I think the religion is stronger, probably, in terms of having more people subscribing to similar or shared ideas, probably,
Right.
but.
Yeah.
Yeah, but something I wanted to sort of move into. So there's a passage in your book uh, talking about Fyodor Dostoevsky,
Hmm.
and this is describing 20 years prior to him writing The Idiot. Um, he was going to be executed along with some other prisoners, and he was faced with his death, with his own mortality at that moment. They could have shot him, but by order of the czar, they decided, okay, no, we're not going to do that. You will go to Serbian prison and then serve in the military. Okay. But what happened to him, and as you wrote in the book, he wrote a letter to his brother saying, "I have this now new immense gratitude for life. A newfound appreciation that I would not have had if I had not come face to face with my death."
Hmm.
So where I suppose I'm heading with this is many people when they do have these near death experiences, be it Dostoevsky's situation, maybe cancer, things of that nature. Um, they develop this greater appreciation for life if maybe they don't actually die, right? But then there's other people who face those experiences as well, who um, don't exactly come out with that appreciation, but they may come out with more resilience. So now I know where I want to head with this. At first, I was just speaking through it. So now, can you talk about your time in Japan in 1991 and Mount Unzen and your sort of experience with a near-death experience? Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, in 1991, I was teaching English in this very small town in Nagasaki. The town's name, of all things, is Obama, which I
Yeah.
never thought I would
Mm.
hear again.
Mhm.
And it has and in it, the town just rests on the edges of this big mountain, Mount Unzen. And I was always a little worried about this mountain because 200 years earlier, it had been the site of one of Japan's worst natural disasters in history. It had erupted, caused a tidal wave, 30,000 people died.
Mhm.
And when I was there, it started smoking again, and this was cause of great concern. And all of these leading volcanologists from the world came to the town to set up to study this volcano. And it was quite terrifying because there was sense that what can you do? What do you do? We had a meeting with the other teachers, and the only decision that we came up with was everyone gets a plastic helmet.
Wow.
So that's
Yeah.
what we had to deal with this volcano. Um, but every day I would watch the news, and the volcanologists were always there saying, we're not in any immediate danger. It's going to be okay. And then one day in the news, we learned all the volcanologists are dead.
Wow.
The mountain erupted. It had this huge pyroclastic flow. That's a new word I learned um, living then, and it. Uh, what helped at the time, it wasn't so obvious to me that this is how it was going to be, but the pyroclastic flow went west,
Mhm.
and I was living on the east side.
Mm.
So for the first eruption, it seemed that we were still okay, just covered in ash everywhere. But it became very clear that all the experts had died. It was terrifying. We had
Mm.
no idea what was going to happen. On the news, they're saying that the whole mountain might just be annihilated, like just might
Wow.
completely explode. And so during that time, yeah, I was deeply terrified. I thought I was going to die. It was a very terrifying time, and we had these earthquakes happening like every hour. We had
Mm.
just the ground kept shaking, and I was really quite worried then that I was going to die. But in the end, I was I wasn't hurt at all, and it had this. I had then I mean that was only it only had that one bad eruption that one day when the pyroclastic flow flew west and killed these volcanologists and killed many other people. And after that, though, I had a reaction which I've since learned is actually quite common. That it was kind of curious that I feel empowered by this. That
Mm.
I thought I was facing my death, and I was terrified. And in the end, it was I wasn't harmed at all. And about there's research in about 40% of people who have these kinds of experiences where they're facing something that they think might kill them, and they come out without any harm, that they can feel empowered by this. And
Mm.
so I live in Vancouver now, and Vancouver, we're overdue for the next big one.
Yeah.
It's that we keep reading articles that who knows, that any day now, the city could be wiped out with a huge earthquake. And all of my friends are very anxious about this, and it doesn't. I have this I feel kind of empowered whenever the topic comes up, that I've made it through this before. I can do it again, and I really am not that worried about it. And this is a one of the common reactions then that people can have, to the extent that you don't suffer. That's the key thing. That
Mm.
in the end, I was completely not harmed in any way. And so people will respond to these confrontations with death in quite different ways. Dostoevsky's response is also quite common, where people come to appreciate the scarcity of life, that
Yeah.
that this can be taken from you at any time, and makes you just want to live life to the fullest. And he also became more religious at that moment. That's also another sort of common reaction. But this is sort of this one big challenge that we all have to figure out, that we recognize that we're mortal, that we recognize that someday it all will come to an end for us. And this is one of, I think, the bigger anxieties that we have to figure out, that we have to um, come to terms with. And you mentioned earlier that you had Sheldon Solomon on your show here,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and with terror management theory, that's that's a theory about how can we come to cope with the anxiety of being aware that someday, we reach the end of our life story, and there's nothing we can do about that. You can exercise all you want,
Hmm.
you can eat all the kale that you want, and still you can't prevent this. And maybe you can, if you're lucky, you can maybe delay it a little bit. That's the most we can hope for. And yeah, and so terror management theory shows that what we try to do, we have these psychological defenses that we turn to help us to cope with this awareness that they're going to die someday. And what people tend to do is they try to align themselves with their cultures, because their culture feels a little more immortal than their own lives do. That, the US has been around for a long time, it'll continue to be around for a long time. So if you can just feel that you are, a key member of your culture, that if you're living up to your culture standards, then you can feel a little more immortal. You can feel that you're aligned with this force that is going to continue to exist, that has this, that isn't going to suffer the same sort of brief end that our own lives are, and will. And so, yeah, there's terror management research is fascinating research, just when people are reminded of the fact, hey, just think about it. What's going to happen? You're going to die someday, and to think about this, and people come to they become more patriotic. They come to think of their group as better than other groups, so they become even a little more chauvinistic in this way.
Hmm.
Sure.
And they want to defend the country's rules. They become very insistent on defending the culture's rules, making sure everyone follows the rules, as this is one way of sort of, fortifying the walls of this cultural worldview that we embrace, and that it helps us to make us feel that our lives are not going to be so brief, that we can, that somehow we're going to continue to exist because we're aligned with this more immortal force of our cultures.
Yeah. And
Mm.
it seems like,
Oh, if you don't actually go ahead.
because I just want to finish on this
Yeah.
thought. So, and it also seems like when it comes to, let's say, being a part of the culture kind of more broadly, it doesn't really matter necessarily that you contribute in such a significant way. So, like for me personally, because I'm a writer, so like I don't have any new psychological, so even though I'm a psychotherapist, I don't have like any new psychological insights, right? So, in terms of like, let's say, whatever I tell my patients, yeah, there's stuff that they don't know personally, obviously, because they're not therapists or don't study psychology. And therefore, for them, it's new, right? But for me, like when I write, right, for the most part, in terms of the actual field, I would say the only sort of wrinkle that in my understanding that I contribute is to frame something in a way, not that it's new, but it's just that in a way that maybe other people haven't heard it before. I even maybe haven't heard it before, but it's just sort of frame it in a different way, not necessarily present any new or different ideas. So for me, that feels good enough. It doesn't necessarily even have to be some major discovery or contribution. Again, I'm never going to have that. But I like for a lot of us as writers, the way that, I mean, this is even more broad. This is not even just in terms of psychology,
Hmm.
but it feels like for writers, even sometimes having their own experiences related to whatever these concepts that have been around forever, whatever they are, right? To have their experiences associated with them, that seems to be a big thing too. So again, it's like we kind of try to involve ourselves in the community in any little way that we possibly can.
And actually, I have
Yeah.
sort of two questions. So, one, well, first I'll bring this up. So, you've talked about on the show before that you've struggled with death anxiety,
Sure.
right? And then reading Irv Yalom's work and
Yeah.
things like that help you, will have helped you to some degree. You wouldn't say that it's probably stymied that death anxiety, but like there are these other
Sure.
like perspectives, like for example, writing
Yep.
that gives you a form of sort of even though you don't count, you don't attribute this great meaning to it, this
Okay.
grand meaning, it is something that gives you a sort of sense of symbolic
Immortality.
immortality.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay,
Right.
absolutely. So, okay, uh, now that that's been established, Steve, what I want to sort of ask is for others who, let's say, experience that death anxiety. Um, what so I know you've talked about, more being more culturally aligned with their, their culture, or being more patriotic, but this is actually a very fascinating topic, and I was actually curious, what are some other ways that someone could I suppose, quote unquote, attain that symbolic immortality, or what are other approaches somebody can make? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a problem that's, endemic to our species, that we all have to contend with our own deaths and make come to terms with that. And I think it's not a coincidence that around the world, every known society has some kind of religious beliefs,
Right.
that we create a worldview that and these include mystical beliefs. It goes beyond just what we can see in the here and now, and the vast majority of these religions are quite explicit about that some aspect of you continues to exist afterwards too, that it's providing not just symbolic immortality but literal immortality, right? It's saying
Mm,
that some part of you will continue to exist. You're not going to die. You're going to just move to the next phase, to the next. You're finishing a chapter. You're not.
mm,
The book is not ending.
Mhm.
And so I think our religions do serve this, helping us address this key challenge of that, struggling with the idea that how important can my life be if it's something that's going to end in a certain number of years, and it's not, and after it ends, at some point there's not going to be anyone alive who remembers me, that my existence is just gone, and to come to terms with this. But if you do become committed to a belief system that says no, that you will continue, some part of you will continue to exist, I think that offers a great deal of reassurance. And I think this is key reason why in all societies around the world they have religions. They create um, uh, these explanations of where we come from, and where we're going, and what's the how our existences can still continue even after our physical bodies die.
yeah.
Yeah, and actually, so in the last chapter of the book, you talk about different ways that we could sort of build meaningful lives, like self-grounding, by way of nostalgia, the life story that you sort of tell yourself. Um, also, mystical experiences, psychedelics, going out into nature, things like that. And I remember after reading that, it made me actually think about it. Like, for instance, I started to think in my own life, where am I creating sort of meaningful experiences? And then there was like a part in that last chapter that made me think about, community and the friendships and connections that I have with other people, and actually sort of reevaluating what that's like in my life, and actually even having, after reading the chapter, even having a deeper appreciation, because sometimes, you appreciate all these people and all these things in your life, but when you sometimes when something is framed to you, and then you kind of examine it closer, the way those things kind of impact you are different than when you're kind of going automatically through your day to day, if that makes sense. So when I read that,
Yeah.
I just remember feeling a little just more appreciative, and trying to just think more about my uh like the people I'm around, like Leon included. We have really good friends as well. You mentioned in your book, a lot of people in America, they tend to report having three close friends at most. We're lucky enough to have actually more than that,
Yeah, we have a
I
great
think.
group. Yeah.
Yeah, so
Right.
um yeah, so honestly, uh just reading your book kind of reminded me of, things that I could be more grateful about, and kind of take a second look at and understand, there's a reason to be more grateful and appreciative. So just wanted to say that. That's why,
Yeah.
yeah, I
Well,
appreciate that.
no. Well, thanks for that. And I think that is, yeah, one key way that a key concrete step we can take to help make our lives feel more meaningful, is to try to appreciate what we do have. There's a lot of research showing this. Taking on this appreciative mindset, and reflecting on what we are grateful for, does seem to help people feel that their lives are more meaningful. And I think So, so I was saying earlier, I think our connections are really key to helping lead a more meaningful life, and I think that's something that we can attend to too. That and some kinds of connections seem to be especially important. So, for instance, research finds if when people take on a caretaker role,
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
they tend to feel more meaningful, whether that's taking care of the elderly or taking care of a pet or having kids, taking care of them, that where you have a sense of purpose, you feel that your existence matters. And so I think there are some concrete steps that people can take to make their lives feel more meaningful. Some of these, I think, are things that can just give you like a temporary boost to your
Mm-hmm.
feelings of meaning, because your feelings of meaning, they're not a constant, right? They fluctuate. There's some days you're feeling very engaged and connected, and other days you're feeling really alienated and meaningless. And I think there are some exercises that I talk about in the book that can help you give a temporary boost, such as nostalgic reflections. That when people are nostalgic, they feel that their life is a little more meaningful. They've connected the different chapters of their life story, and get a better understanding of the journey they've been on and the person they've become. And so there are some, yeah, exercises where we can just try to boost our sense of meaning. But I think more importantly is to, kind of reflect on these key domains of connections in our lives and to think about how could we fortify these foundations. How might we become more connected to our communities? How might we derive more of a sense of purpose and mastery from our work? And I think being open-minded to any kind of connections with the transcendent that fit with your worldview, I think is a useful strategy. I think being open-minded about that maybe there is more than what I see here. You don't have to believe everything that comes your way, but there's probably some sort of mystical traditions that fit into one's worldview a little better than others. And
Mm-hmm.
on average, the research is quite clear. When people have these mystical connections, they tend to feel that life is more meaningful. So I think being open to those is another useful strategy that one can take. And one other thing, I just emphasize, uh, Shigeo Ishii, he's a researcher who just wrote a book this week
Mm-hmm.
on the three
Psychological
dimension.
richness. Oh, sorry, never mind. Sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what he argues. Yeah, there's three key facets to a good life, three dimensions of a good life. I think his book is called something like that. And it's a meaningful life, a happy life, and a psychologically rich life. And that's something we haven't really talked about here yet. And that is a strong predictor of feeling that life is meaningful. And that's like challenging yourself. I mean, going out to trying new things, to step out of your comfort zone, and that when you experience new things, these present challenges for you, and it makes your life seem richer, and those feelings of richness helps you feel that life is more meaningful too. So
wait,
I think these are some, yeah, of the kinds of steps we can take.
Steve, do you know Lorraine Besser?
No, no, I
Oh,
don't.
so okay, we literally did an entire episode on psychological richness last week. That's her book.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You should
wow.
look into her
Okay,
work. You
okay.
would love it. She's fantastic.
Oh,
But that's what you just described was her
Yeah.
concept. Yeah. Well, I mean,
okay,
all
oh,
of you
great.
guys have that concept, right? Whoever studies it. But like the point is to say that her book specifically deals with it. So yeah, very interesting stuff.
Okay,
All
great,
right.
great. I'll have
So
to read that.
absolutely. All right. So Alan, before we wrap up, final questions for Steve.
Oh, yes. If we wanted to follow you, follow your work, and of course, buy the book, where can we do that?
Okay, well, the book is on sale at, I believe, every big bookstore around.
Of
So
course.
that's where you can find it online as well. Um, and so I'm at the University of British Columbia. If you Google my name, Steven Heine, you'll find two people will show up.
Hmm.
And it's very confusing because the other Stephen Heine also studies Japan. He also studies religion,
Hmm.
and he's in Florida. Um,
Oh.
we get we get each other's mail.
Hmm.
I once got a paycheck for him. Like it's so. I usually have a J. I use my middle initial J to help
Hmm.
distinguish myself from him.
Hmm.
So, but yeah, please, you can visit my webpage at UBC, where we describe the research that we're doing and all of different papers that I've worked on. And yes, please, I hope you do look for my book because I think it can be useful in the we're dealing with absurd times. I think we are all sort of facing the challenges right now of this moment, and I do think feeling that life is more meaningful is one, one way to sort of protect ourselves from the uncertainty and the anxieties that are out there.
I love it. And I'm assuming you would tell our audience to seize the moment.
That's right. Please. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Steve, thank
Yeah,
you so much for coming
it
on,
was a
especially in
pleasure.
terms of what we do. This is so in line with everything that we talk, well, most of what we talk about. And so I'm so grateful for you coming on. Thank you for this. This
Same
was
here.
Okay.
excellent.
Well, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Talk to you soon.
Take care.
Yeah. Okay. So bye.
Bye.
All right, great. So, everyone, you can follow us at Seize the Moment Podcast on Facebook and on Instagram. On X, we're at Seize_podcast. Like, subscribe,
Hit the
hit the
bell
bell
on
on
YouTube.
YouTube. And again, thank you so much for watching and see you next time.